Hi, I'm Pat Cunningham from the Cito Energy Group. What I'm going to talk to you about today is about risk management, or country risk analysis, as it's normally called. One of the first questions that I get from a lot of people is, you seem to be quite involved in risk management, or at least incorporating it within your work. How did that come about? Because it doesn't seem to be a natural process in many companies. Well, the answer to it, truthfully, it's personal and it's lived. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. What I mean by personal is that, take you back to when I was a teenager, and I can assure you that was a long time ago. I had the good fortune of being brought up in South America, in Peru, in Lima, Peru. And as a teenager there, I had a great life, great culture, great food, great friends, beaches. It was a perfect place until one day there was a military coup. People rioting on the streets, people being imprisoned, protests, newspaper institutions being shut down. Admittedly, it was all bloodless, but this was a shock. Nobody saw it coming. For example, my parents, they lost their life savings. Why? Assets such as foreign currency, which ironically they held in the Royal Bank of Canada many decades ago, frozen and unable to take that money out. A year later, my parents and myself left the country with all our possessions in our bags. We left a great life behind, but lost all our personal savings and wealth. Was that the end? No. Fast forward to 1998. At the time, I was working in the Business and Commercial Development Group at Talisman Energy here in Calgary. And we had identified and acquired a company called Arrakis Energy, who held a 25% interest in an operating entity called the Greater Nile Petroleum Operating Company in southern Sudan. It was a great asset. It was at its early stages, a great reservoir, great environment in terms of the subsurface. There was a pipeline, 1,600 kilometer pipeline that we built with our Malaysian and Chinese partners. It was an absolute success, despite the fact that in background mode, there was a lingering and subturating, shall we say, civil war that was happening between the North and the South. This, we perceived at the time, was not an issue and we could manage it. Until the situation came to a boil and it ramped up. We had NGOs and religious groups protesting against us, sending letters. We were in the press. There was even legislation in the United States hoping to delist us from the New York Stock Exchange. This is something we could not tolerate. It was sapping our management of energy and attention to what we do best, or did best, and that was oil and gas operations. At the end of the day, we were forced to sell our 25% working interest in this venture to a third party. Again, I would say, to really no advantage of either our shareholders or the people in Sudan. So the lesson here was, we didn't see that coming either. So, what could we have done differently? Well, in the case of my experiences as a teenager in South America, you could argue be more aware of your surroundings, the press, the media, etc. But that was a long time ago. In the more recent past, in the last 10, 20 years, there's been a tendency of people going into various jurisdictions impulsively, without enough due diligence, without enough emphasis on what would be regarded as these are the secondary issues to my business. It doesn't really matter what the politics is. We can operate separately. Well, clearly, these risks are clear and present. Some of these risks are clear and present dangers to your operating environment. They will destroy value to you and your shareholders. There are jurisdictions that are sufficiently dysfunctional that they impede normal operations. It is glaringly obvious when you approach them, either you get off the plane in whatever jurisdiction it is in, that you know this is going to be a difficult place. And there are regimes in which you simply, for reputational purposes, cannot and should not do business there. And remember, one of the key aspects of a forward-looking strategy is sometimes you gotta say no. So a good question to ask is, how do we make this relevant? How do we make this practical in terms of you as a company wanting to enter a given jurisdiction? The traditional method of risk analysis is simply collating a series of disparate pieces of information. Most of this information is collatable from online sources, but it's at a very high level. It consists of items such as gross domestic product, debt levels, sovereign debt, and frankly, a lot of that is quite far removed from the requirements of a lot of companies that approach us and your needs on the ground. One of the key questions I ask myself, no matter where it is and how mature the environment is, what is the willingness of either the jurisdiction, i.e. the country, or the company to pay its debts? If that unwillingness is not there, or should I say, if there is political obstacles to it, if they have, for example, very low credit levels, that normally implies a structural problem that flows down the business chain and would invariably be affecting your business in country. So how do you use this high-level information to really apply it in terms of an entry? Well, going from the ability or the inability of various jurisdictions to pay their debt goes straight to the concept of creditworthiness. This you can certainly find. This is very tangible, either at a country level or at a business level. You can find out what the creditworthiness is of any given company. There's lots of sources out there. But you need to dig down and give yourself some granularity to this concept. A good example of this type of questioning, focus in on Argentina. It's a mature economy, good per capita GDP, good quality of life, but unfortunately has a very poor repayment record. I'll throw your mind back to 2001, when it reneged on all its international debt. This did not go well in the international stock markets or for the Argentine stock market. Bring you fast forward to the current day, where Argentina is on the verge of reneging on that debt yet again, but in this case, their debt amounts to $100 billion, but now they're calling it a restructuring. If I was going into Argentina and I heard such terminology such as financial restructuring, I would immediately be concerned about my ability to send dividends out of the country, get cash in or out of Argentina. These would be great red flags for me at the time. Now, you'll normally find that jurisdictions like these, and there are many examples, not just Argentina, this dysfunctionality, this financial and political dysfunctionality, goes down the business chain, and it produces certain types of behaviors. In Argentina, for example, you've got a very protectionist industry, in particular the oil and gas industry, the service side and the E&P side, really protect their own. How do I know that? I used to work for an Argentine company. I used to work in Buenos Aires. I know the mindset, and I know how some of the management to labor force interrelations do not work. And did I mention the unions? The unions are all powerful in Argentina, both in terms of logistics and operations. Anybody going into Argentina should realize that from day one, you have your work cut out. So how do we actually get a bit more granular with this? Well, we just don't talk about individual countries, the highlighted ones with the very specific problems. For every country entry that we do, from scratch or a refresh on a country entry for a given client, we actually use what we call internally a risk register. And it's not just 1, 2, 3 risks. We have a total of 17 risks. They range from the politics, the security risk, the tax risk, the investor risk, the risk on repayments, any form of material or contractual risk. We put it down and we evaluate it. And we basically say, is it low, medium, or high? And so at the end of maybe a good due diligence process, you've got the totality of what you feel is the totality of risk that you're exposed to. But where we differ is that we ask two fundamental questions. The first one is, what's the likelihood of this risk occurring? For example, expropriation, many people feel, is a very rare occurrence. I can assure you it's not. But it's a valid question to ask. Is it a high risk? In Canada, it's a very low risk. In various parts of Africa, it's a medium to high risk. But the more important question that I think that we all should be asking, and especially you as a business owner should be asking, is if this risk did in fact occur, how would it affect my business? Would it cease operations? Would revenue cease? Or would it be a partial? Would it be gradational? Would I even notice it's occurring? The object of a risk register is to take all of the identified risks and collate them in such a way that we can structure commercial and legal agreements that will mitigate these risks against harm. I mentioned expropriation. It's a good point. It's personal to me, and it's alive and well. Expropriation has two forms, the classical form and what I would call the small e expropriation, or expropriation by other means. Expropriation, as you probably know, is the taking away of your asset without you having any either legal recourse or any fair market compensation for that loss of your asset or your valuables. Small e expropriation is a series of knife cuts that prevent you from doing business. They can range from enhanced tax, enhanced working interest, and government intervention into your operations. Where are these alive in the world at the moment? Contrary to most people's opinion, it's alive and well in many parts of the world. Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. In particular, I would identify countries such as Burundi, Tanzania, and various Middle East countries that clearly have made these moves on not only Canadian, but international companies. As an aside, I would say that I find expropriation a really crude tool. It's normally symptomatic of a government or ministry or jurisdiction applying a very blunt tool to sort out a very specific problem, or it's symptomatic of their frustration that they're having to carry this out. It could also be, of course, as a pressure or a symptom of domestic politics that this occurs. As a good example of semi-recent expropriations is Venezuela. Under the previous president, Hugo Chavez, in August of 2011, he issued a decree nationalizing or expropriating, should I say, all of the mining industry in Venezuela. One company, Resoro, a Canadian company at the time, lost ability to operate. Many others did as well. Despite the actions of the Venezuelan government in expropriating their operating assets, Resoro managed to bring this to a forum. It's ICSID, a forum within the World Bank, and in 2007 were awarded a $1 billion compensation for their loss. A more insidious form of expropriation has been occurring recently, not just in Latin America or in Africa, but around the world. And it involves governments through the same types of problems or disputes that they encounter, enacting legislation or decrees that increase your taxes, your duties, or even enforced working interest in your operations by a government that is, for whatever series of reasons, disgruntled. Expropriation is not simply the withdrawal of your assets to prevent you generating revenues. They can also behave in such ways that it's an incremental decrease in your revenues, tantamount to what would be a form of blackmail. For example, increase in taxes. We've seen this in Algeria over the last decade. Increase in windfall taxes, imposition of ownership structures that are clearly detrimental to your business, allegations of unethical behavior, allegations of not paying enough taxes. These are all red flags. And a good example of this is Tanzania. This happened in 2017 to Acacia Mining, now a subsidiary of Barrick Gold. Tanzania, some time ago, imposed a series of restrictions on the exportation of gold concentrate. Not only did they impose the export of the raw product, they accused Acacia of unethical behavior, tax evasion, and also, and curiously, over-reporting on their production, which I won't get into, but it's a curious allegation. Once you hear these compounding issues, you know you've got a problem. On top of these allegations, and this is a gem, Acacia was served with a $190 billion tax assessment. I'll just repeat that, $190 billion of tax assessment for past due taxes. Now, clearly, this was a shocker. Fast forward till 2020, when Acacia, still a subsidiary of Barrick Gold, ended up agreeing on a payment of $300 million as opposed to the $190 billion. I think that in my simple math is about 630 times less. They also agreed to setting up of a separate company, a 16% working interest in this company from the original project, called Twiga, which in Swahili means giraffe. It goes to show that during this period, this 3-year period, there was value destruction for shareholders, for the actual company's finances, and for the government of Tanzania. But it also shows that governments can use very crude tools to try to solve their problems. In essence, the Tanzanian government did not have enough insight or operational view on the operations, or all the way down to their tax authority, maybe did not have the level of competence and oversight to verify this through either regular audits or their accounting process. As an aside, in terms of companies that are in the natural resource sector, these type of companies are very prone to what I call political assassination. They're a convenient ploy. Natural resources is very key to national identity in many countries. And allegations of unethical behavior, of exploitation of these natural resources, is almost indefensible from the perspective of a domestic environment with domestic politics. And sometimes it's just simply not worth battling. An agreement to some of these pressures may be your best recourse. So the question would be, what type of measures can we take to protect ourselves from government behavior, third-party behaviors that will endanger either going into the country or operating in the country? Call it your commercial Kevlar. And really, no amount, I should say this in deference to my legal colleagues, no amount of legal documentation or contract will fully protect you from items ranging from expropriation to non-payment. Top of my list of items that I always try to ensure is enacted is partner with a good local partner, especially in jurisdictions that are what I would call less than 95% rule of law. And my legal partners and colleagues will explain that to you. In essence, don't put 100% of your investment money into plant, equipment, and machinery. Partner with a local entity. Do due diligence. Identify the right person with the right connections. As one of my partners is always quoting, let them have skin in the game. In other words, align your interests in terms of partnerships. And invariably, some of these partners will have a lot of what I would call over-the-radar capabilities, domestic politics. They will understand it. Secondly, if you're going to be investing substantial figures, do it with a local bank or with an international bank with a local subsidiary. Again, local banks have massive capabilities in terms of political radar, in terms of credit worthiness assessments, and they've invested much of your revenue and income in services and processes to flesh out who are individuals that would be at risk to your operations. Your local bank is in many cases your best friend. Thirdly, in terms of your armor, many jurisdictions such as Canada, the US, and the UK have their equivalents, government bodies that will actually provide you loans for whatever activity, be it services, be it an investment. You can cover off on some of these loans. They will cost you, but you can roll this into your cost of your product. Have this. It may not be the perfect solution for you, but have it as a layer of Kevlar. It's essential. Fourthly, be aware of your political environment. It seems to be a very simple thing to say, but people going into a new country, entities going into a new country, lose focus as to what's happening. I'll give you an example. I had an opportunity to bring a team of technical people into a West African country, Mauritania, in fact, Nouakchott. Nobody's ever heard of it. It's on the west coast of Africa. I was assured there were no security issues. Everything was politically stable. I got off the plane at 2 o'clock in the morning in pouring rain, met by military troops. There had been a military takeover in the last 24 hours. It was a real challenge even to get to the airport, never mind to get to the ministry that next morning. You can never be too well prepared up to the 11th hour for your first country entry. The importance of local knowledge is what I would call the influencers. People that have been around for many years. Individuals, professionals, political lobbyists, use them. Law firms on the ground normally have great staying power. Law firms that are well connected, that have got years of experience, can be a great asset for you on the ground. Lastly, and it seems to be more of a motherhood statement, work with a high degree of transparency in your operations and what you're doing. Don't fall foul of opaque negotiations, of opaque relationships with the government. And I would say an extension of this is use stakeholders, maybe even NGOs on the ground, as people who will vet your operations, who will put their hand up and say, yes, they've done all the right things. They're transparent. We can see what they're doing. Because when the going gets tough, you may need their support. It may not be political support, but it is community and societal support that you need. And lastly, And this is something close to my heart, since I was brought up in South America and know the quality and caliber of individuals that exist there. Choose local professionals, engineers, professionals, accountants, and lawyers. They are your great asset, and they can integrate into society. They are integrated into society and will be one of your best lines of operational defense. So the question is, where and in what country could you apply some of these strategies that I just mentioned, those 1 to 6 strategies? Well, I think the easiest one would be Mexico. And I'll give you a bit of a background. Recently, Mexico was a ray of light in South America. We thought that 5 to 10 years ago that the previous government had turned a corner and we had a very liberal environment, very inviting of business, that the oil and gas industry, for example, the oilfield service industry, would blossom. However, with the election in 2018 of López Obrador, the government has turned decidedly cold on foreign investment. It's left of center and clearly opposed to the private sector. How do we see this? Well, there's a great emphasis on 2 main institutions, on a debt-ridden Pemex, this national oil company, and also on a problematic Federal Electricity Commission, which regulates all the power supply, gas, and then power coming in to Mexico. Why is this of concern, and what are the symptoms? Well, the Mexican government in this administration has put dampers on 7 major pipeline projects coming from the United States, Canada, and Mexico itself. They're valued at around $5 billion. And the gas flow along those was going to be somewhere in the region of 7.5 BCF a day. They're basically wanting to renegotiate terms. This has really chilled the investment community. There's even talk that Mexico does not abide by contractual terms. There's even talk, and let us hope it is wrong, that Mexico would resort to either a mild form of expropriation or expropriation as itself, not as a fact, but as a threat to force companies to the negotiating table. Clearly, this has put a very big chill under investor confidence in Mexico, and you should be aware of it. And that's at a very high level. Layered on top of this, you have some operational challenges in Mexico, from security to getting around. And it tends to be quite regionalized from the Tampico area on the Atlantic coast all the way down to Cancun, or on the west side from Mexico City in a sort of a wedge shape moving out into Acapulco. What do I mean by these operational challenges? Well, they're quite obvious. It's threat to the individual, threat to your assets, to your trucking company, to your warehouse. I speak absolutely perfect Spanish, but I will stand out like a sore thumb in a Mexican environment. Look at me. I did in South America, but no amount of cultural acclimation will protect me from this. So bottom line, with Mexico, it's quite simple. You need to find a very reliable and solid Mexican partner. Due diligence and background checks will be essential. As per previous commentary on investment, make sure your partner, not just an agent, is willing to invest their money into your project. You've got to have aligned interests. This is certainly a country with less than 95% adherence to the rule of law. Politics does matter. Local fiefdoms and political influence matter in Mexico. Oligarchs abound in Mexico. Your partner is key to your success from day one in Mexico. So how at CITO do we keep on top of these issues? Well, frankly, it's not a direct There's no direct answer to this. It's really a three-part answer. One, as I said to you right at the beginning, it's lived. A lot of us at CETO have lived in real tough places. We haven't just been there on holiday. We've lived all over the world in environments where you normally wouldn't expect. This has given us a certain baseline of behavior, a certain baseline of how to do business that helps us evaluate current behavior of governments or entities. Secondly, is your connections. Well, in fact, it would be CETO's network. Your network is very applicable. You've got to use your network to your best advantage. Local knowledge is a great benchmarker. As I mentioned, banks, contacts, go to conferences. If you're a business development person, you should be going when you can travel, COVID allowing, to travel, conferences, get verification and corroboration of the risks on the ground. Don't simply do what we would call a desktop survey. You have to corroborate this. In fact, do double corroboration in terms of the risks on the ground. And thirdly, there's actually a lot of very good granular information that's out there in terms of public available information. It may cost you, but it's probably worth getting to layer in either at the top layer or at the bottom layer. It's amazing how many gems you can pick out of publicly available information. You can't trust all of it. You have to be careful so it won't result in a perfect process. As my partner Nick will have told you about sanctions, you don't have to be a perfectionist about these things. You've just got to be shown, or at least show your board members, that you did all the right things to a given point. So how do I make this relevant to a company wanting to get on a plane and do business in either Kuwait, Baghdad, Abu Dhabi, Bogota, or anywhere around the world? I have to be really cognizant that many companies are really not interested in academic exercises of comparative risk analysis that the Moody's of this world or Standards & Poor's do in this world. They're more interested, or you should be more interested, in acquiring that entry business. We can deal with operational risks afterwards, but from a country risk perspective, from an entry perspective, you've got some key questions that you need answering that I have to try to answer for you or with you. And those are, how well prepared am I before I get on that plane to Baghdad or Bogota? Do I have a country risk manual with me? Do I even have a briefing book? You should have a country briefing book before you go into any jurisdiction. Do I understand the business environment? Have you asked yourself the basic of it? How does it operate? If I have problems there, will I be treated fairly? Are the courts fair and unbiased? A key question many clients ask us, will their agents treat them fairly? Will their agents be acting on their best behalf? If I don't get along with my agent for whatever reason, what can I do about it? These are questions you need to have answered before you get on that plane, before you arrive. And in ending this, I think one of the key takeaways for you is look at some of the high indicators, the high-level indicators, government behavior, institutional behavior, because they invariably cascade down the feeding chain, the organic chain into the business environment. Are there constant riots on the street? Are there constant strikes on the street? How dysfunctional, how functional is the government? So what kind of advice would I be offering companies wishing to enter new international environments? Well, clearly, the first is get well informed. There's people on the ground, there's people like ourselves with local knowledge. Not only do you need to be informed before you enter, but you need to stay informed, stay current, and stay aware of your environment. Remember, it's all about relationships, especially in the likes of South America Africa, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. You cannot build a business with lack of trust or relationships. Those are key elements to it. And in essence, always keep the long view to your business. Don't look at it in short terms. Don't look at it as a series of small rabbit holes to go down. Take the long view, and like any other good strategy, business strategy or marketing strategy, one of the key elements is sometimes you've just got to say no. But whatever you do, look after those relationships.